Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, and I'm live here with you in the green room. This is, I believe, our third live stream of the week. Been a pretty jam-packed week. We're always here Monday nights, and I will, of course, be back here Monday night, as I said on the last stream, with the great Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, and we'll be getting into more of what's going on with Iran and all of that. So that's a very super important conversation live stream. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already, and hit that notification bell so you get alerts about our upcoming shows. And then, of course, make sure you check us out at libertarianchristians.com. I am joined tonight by a guest who's his first time on the show. I've been over on, I guess, the show that he and the LP Alliance do. Actually, I guess would you call that one show or several shows? I mean, you have like a channel and you have a slew of different types of shows, but I'll go ahead and let this is Phil Rein from LP Alliance. Go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the what LPA is, how you guys founded it, what it's about, the different things you guys are doing, and we'll just kind of dive into the conversation from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm a libertarian. I'm a scientist. I largely stayed out of the party for a long time, finding it pretty ineffective at moving liberty forward. And I kind of just stayed out of it and didn't really like being around libertarians or all that much. And I figured most people got it, right? Everybody that's there should have an understanding of what we're up against. And then around 2024, it seemed like people were not very aware of what we were up against, and some things are happening with the party, and largely the way people were treating each other and the culture within the party that I was like, okay, people need to come back. We need to shape things forward. And so a group of us kind of came together with this idea to fix the Libertarian Party and the culture surrounding it. And I know that's probably an insane take and ask, but we had a lot of discussions early on about like what can we do? Can we ask for changes? Can we do a slate? Can we do this? And we kind of came around the idea that we really just need to have solidarity among the different versions of libertarian, learn how to communicate with one another, particularly if most of our principles are all the same, might have a slight deviation here or there. But people just stop being able to talk to one another. And so our big push was, can we get these conversations going? Can we change kind of the structure of the party? Can we get it to work for everybody? And so those are some of the ideas that we're bouncing around. We're pretty open to having most people there. As you know, Jacob, you've been there. We've had private conversations, I think, that have been, even though we might disagree on quite a bit, I think they're pretty amenable. And so we try to project that out and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people active. And I think the realization is just that the world is so authoritarian right now, that like, if you're not looking around going, well, you can easily see the slide to just complete technocratic totalitarianism rising. If that is not enough to get you to kind of drop some of these smaller things, I don't know what will. But we're hoping that enough people will be able to do that. We can start communicating and finding ways to make the party kind of work for everybody. And so there's competing ideas even inside of LPA for that. Like, we don't have any demands of our members to be like, you have to believe this or that,
Yeah. A quick tangent, you just kind of briefly glossed over, like, I'm a scientist. Like, you might be the smartest person to be on my show. I mean, you're into some pretty heavy, like, stuff in terms of, your scientific career. And like, I mean, you study like particles and stuff, right? I mean, I'm going off memory here.
Yeah. I studied nanomaterials. So like my dissertation was focusing on nanomaterials and how they can be used to kind of manipulate biomolecules. And so like, there's applications for like gene therapies and cancer treatments and things like that were kind of the focus of what my dissertation was on. But it was really a fundamental physics at the nanoscale that I was looking at. But I would not say I'm necessarily the smartest. People always say that when I'm like, oh yeah, it's analytical chemistry that I was in. And I'm like, no, it's just persistence. It's just saying, okay, I'm just going to keep trying to learn at this thing and keep trying to understand it. And I'm pretty sure you've had people that are plenty more smart than myself.
Yeah, I consider myself a science enthusiast. So like I study enough about different fields just to kind of like get to the point where I go, wow, there's so much here I don't know. And I can now just sort of like, to someone who's done no research, I can kind of sound a little smart. And to someone who's an expert, I can be like, hey, I know, enough to distinguish myself from maybe like a layman, but that's about it. So
well, I would say that's how it is in graduate school. Like, you're like, I know everything, and then you're like, oh my god, I know nothing, and then you I hit a valley and then eventually you build up. Like I know something, but there's like that classic statement of like, as your circle of knowledge gets bigger, so does the circumference of what you don't know.
Right.
So you start asking more questions and realizing you don't have kind of all the answers.
Yeah. So obviously, and you guys fairly early on, I guess, had me on your show, and we kind of talked about some of the background on this. I mean, I guess it's weird to talk about myself in this context, but I guess I'm in this weird spot where I actually think the important, and this can almost go both ways. I feel like my importance in the history of the LP over the last 6 years or so with the Mises Caucus, the takeover, all the kind of drama and infighting that's taken place. I feel like sometimes people overstate my importance in it, but of course, maybe that's just me trying to give myself more of an out now that things haven't gone as well. So, I can kind of maybe see why people could say that's a cop out. I don't want to say I did nothing, but I just see. I'm sure you've seen it. There's this meme that gets shared around when people talk about libertarians who supported Trump, and it's
Yeah.
got Angela, it's got Heiss, it's got Dave Smith, it's got being libertarian, it's got Rechtenwald, and then it's got me. And I'm just like, okay, like I wasn't even at the national convention. First of all, I was not on the LNC. It was like I had like of anyone on that list. It's like I mean, I guess the only reason I'm there is because I made a public endorsement of Trump. But it's not like I pulled any of the strings. It wasn't my, Anyway, just all that to say, I guess though, just to own it to somewhat, like I was a state organizer here in PA. I was really driven to the Mises Caucus because, kind of like what you said at the beginning, I saw the LP as useless. And so then when there was a caucus that was like Ron Paul style libertarians, and they're like, hey, we want to come in and kind of get away from this sort of like cliche. We're here to run candidates to just win elections and get liberty in our lifetime. And we're fiscally conservative and socially liberal and just really uninspiring stuff. And uh, I know there's people who joined the party through the Gary Johnson, Bill Weld campaign, and I don't like to just dump on Gary Johnson like everyone else does. At the same time, though, I mean, like, I feel like you'd probably agree that campaign, for all of its flashy like numbers in terms of getting out the vote, it just wasn't very inspiring campaign. I feel like most people who voted for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld did it more so because it was like Trump versus Hillary, and they just really didn't want to do that. They didn't want to vote for either of them. So more of the moderates went libertarian than they might do in a typical election. So I was like, hey, I want to be part of something that makes the LP, makes the LP better, that advances messaging, and that also I felt like when I had started to dip my toe into the movement and the party, that it didn't feel exactly welcoming at a certain type of culture that was kind of hostile to anyone who was, perhaps a bit more on the social conservative side. Um, and so I guess I'd be curious, like, what do you think about that in terms of like a lot of the first movers and joiners of the Mises Caucus felt like the party had drifted too much to like a monoculture, maybe in the more progressive side of things. Do you think that was, I mean, I don't know if you're in a position to have much of an opinion on that, but like, what do you think about that, just from your perspective, even though you weren't involved? Do you think that's a fair thing for people to have been feeling like there needed to be a culture change, feel like the party had been ineffective, and there needed to be some kind of radical shakeup, and not just let's keep doing things the same way we always did? Because I always like to start these conversations here because it's like I get frustrated when I know it's a bit of a long opening ramble, but like I feel like there's some people who, when they evaluate the Mises Caucus in the last 6 years, their opinion is like everything was just fine with the LP. And I'm like, I don't even know how to start the conversation if we're saying the LP was just great and healthy and there was nothing that could have been improved upon, no problems underneath the surface. It was just perfect. And the Mises Caucus came and wrecked it. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think with any institution, there's going to be problems. There's going to be people that are kind of ostracized out of it, or that that there's going to be disagreements about what is the trajectory of how do you move the actual needle. And like I get it. Like Gary Johnson's a pragmatic candidate. He did not make me like so excited like that he was going to represent me. But I did look at it as like, hey, any conversation away from the duopoly opens the door for like more radical libertarian ideas to come through. That being said, like I said, it wasn't something super inspiring to me. It also wasn't something super noxious to me. Like, I know some people were like, this is like heresy that he's up there representing it. I looked at it as like, I don't think a lot of people are, at the position necessarily to accept my version of libertarian, kind of extremely radical version of libertarianism. And so I'm okay if somebody's like a little bit more pragmatic and if it gets more eyes onto some of the stuff. I probably should start by saying that like my opinions don't represent LPA in totality. So I'm going to speak just from myself in this case. But I will agree that yes, there was probably some cultural issue, but I think the problem is that instead of it becoming like we need to shift a place where like all people are welcome, it became like it's going to move drastically to a culturally conservative paleo strategy, which meant that like even the existence of more progressive leaning libertarians socially would basically feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, in many cases even threatened kind of away from the party. And I look at that and like, man, this is like a failure. Like, why are we letting cultural things do this? The point of libertarianism is that like culture will exist naturally. It is something you go into voluntarily, you exist with, you build, and we don't want government to do it. And and so each person can have their cultural preferences, and that should be welcome in Libertarian Party in theory. I don't know enough about, I think, the way things went back then. I obviously have an outside perspective of it. I've heard rumors that like originally the Mises Caucus started out without being a reference to culture, and then at some point like another plank was added that it was going to be, you have to have it as a culture component as well. And maybe was always the plan, was to try to kind of paleo convert from the Republican Party into pulling the constitutionalists. I don't know. But I know that if you don't leave any room for one side of a culture and you say we're taking over the party, and then you basically say screw all those donors when they were people that actually cared about moving the needle, maybe just they had a different cultural opinion. That's where I kind of go like, I think it went wrong. And it's the reason why like I think our strategy of saying like, look, it doesn't really matter where you are culturally. If you're going to fight for everybody's liberty, whether it's somebody you disagree with culturally or not, then it should be there. And I'll give an example. The last LPPA, Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, convention, there was discussions of like, well, we can't promote this culture, because it's a specific topic and we only want to talk principles. But then it talks about like in the bylaws about religion and protecting religion. And it's like, well, now you're being very specific here, but you're not allowed to be kind of specific here. And so it was if it's going to be neutral, like everything has to be neutral, first principles only, no buzzwords for anything. And it seemed like it was still lopsided, although the original document for the bylaws, I think, was, but then the body kind of shifted it more again towards a certain culture. So I would be fine with a like completely culturally neutral party, and then allow the candidates to kind of be the different competing cultural visions for the party.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on this, even going back to when I joined the caucus. And I will say, so one of the when I haven't checked the platform, or sorry, the platform in a hot minute. I know that there was originally a platform related to identity politics, and I think also one based on culture that basically, but they were basically saying that like while we're against identity politics defined as like using the state to lobby for certain privileged rights, or something like that, for certain certain groups, of people, just kind of because of basic libertarian ideas that like the only rights are property rights, individual rights. There's no like this group has different rights than that group of rights, and we didn't even want to like we I guess that was done because it was sort of like back then the culture war was really big, and there was just this idea that like we wanted to detach ourselves from that, not have any messaging that kind of diluted that fundamental libertarian idea that it's individual rights all the way down. And so we want to be very careful about, even if there are like, because obviously in history there's groups that have been discriminated against, but it's like, so that's bad. But what you need to do there is just like you say, it's wrong to discriminate against groups because it's like, there's individuals, and you shouldn't discriminate against individuals because of group identity. So it's just trying to be consistent on rejecting any kind of identitarian politics was the foundation. And then saying this kind of 80-20 rule, which was that, like, we didn't have an immigration plank, we didn't have an abortion plank. And it was just like, we don't care kind of where you stand on a lot of issues. If you come and just affirm these kind of like 5 basic things that we agree on, then you can be on the team. And I do think that was practiced early on, and I do think that you're correct that I don't think anything was formally changed. I just think the culture within the caucus changed over time, just from my perspective. There was always some who were not tolerant, though, of a different culture, and it was funny. I remember, people might be surprised to hear this, but like back, man, this must have been like 2021, maybe. I'm guessing here, but it was early on, and I was a moderator in the Facebook page at the time, and it was Pride Month, and someone I know made a Mises Caucus logo with like just like the rainbow pride colors. And I knew people who were in the caucus who were, gay and part of the even trans, part of the LGBT thing. And even though I don't like the rainbow, pride color flag things like that, at that point I was like still thinking that like, well, we're trying to be kind of uh tolerant of those kind of things here. So I thought I would post it in the group to be like, hey, if anyone wants this, um, you know, go ahead and use it. And that caused like a huge, like, I mean, giant fiasco, like just tons of people pissed off about it, which was the first time I realized that the caucus did skew a lot more towards one culture and against another one than I had uh, previously and anticipated. And my stance on that also should be worth clarifying. I don't have a problem with like LPA or a caucus using pride logos or having a strong cultural message that like they connect to liberty, because that's kind of my whole shtick, right? Like biblical anarchy, Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm like,
Yep.
I lead by being a Christian, and my libertarianism kind of flows as a like an outflow of my Christian principles, and I kind of want to like my main focus is like I want to get other Christians to come to the same conclusion I've come to based on what Christian scriptures and tradition teaches. I just don't think the party itself as like our candidates or I mean candidates a little bit messier. Like I think it varies more on like the state level candidates, but I think our national candidate and I think our national accounts and our state affiliate accounts should stay out of that and be very like minimalistic messaging at best. Um it's kind of my take on that. But yeah, I definitely think the Mises Caucus culture shifted over time. I don't think it was ever like a formal change written into the caucus platform. I could be wrong on that. Someone could challenge me on it. Um, I will say though, like, this is maybe where we can dive into it more. Like, I think there's a certain way to be a social progressive that's good, and a certain way to be a social progressive that's toxic. And that goes for being a conservative too, by the way. I think there's a certain way to be a social conservative that's productive and okay and healthy, and a way to do it that's toxic. And the more and again, I might be biased here. I might have been like, because of my affiliation with the caucus, maybe there's some kind of uh toxic pull, right? Like I was pulling from a sort of like, the data was skewed, but it seemed like a lot of the types of social progressives I encountered in the party, who were hostile towards us were being progressives in a way that I thought was antithetical to liberty. So over time, it kind of felt like, well, maybe we do have to kind of have this correction in the culture because it's skewed too far uh, this other way. I mean, I have more to say to that, but I'll pause, let you respond.
No, I mean, like I can understand the perspective you're saying that that there may have been people that the way they interacted with broad swaths of people was like painting with a broad brush, immediately guilt by association. But I think some of that is probably informed by the kind of friend enemy distinction that occurred, right? You had bad actors and negative and toxic people, and nobody would call them out at all. It was just, your side did something wrong and then it's forgiven, right? Because they're your cultural ally or they're your political ally or whatever. And the way I look at it is, voluntary collectives are a good thing. They become bad when you start giving them rights above one another. And so when you have this large friend to enemy distinction that happens, really bad actors, people that give liberty a bad name, are just kind of left out in the open. There is no self-criticism at all. And it's only criticism of the other side. And I think that is extremely unhealthy, to have a kind of wide net of people, that you do have to sometimes ostracize bad actors from your own, cultural or political side, and say, we can't behave this way. Whether that, and I think, looking, instead of singling out the bad actors, when you say guilt by association or whatever, then it becomes, I think it kind of amplifies that, and it kind of just snowballs into this very toxic space. I do think that some of the predictions were correct, though, from some of these people that were probably, maybe you would call them shrieking about what it was. And I think some of that was because they saw what was the bad actions that were being allowed to happen on one side. And then they were kind of not maybe pretending that their own kind of communication style was not part of that. I always say, you can push somebody that's on your side away, by your behavior, and the way you communicate. And you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to take somebody and push them into a worse space, and then stop sort of a collaboration that could be moving the ball forward. And like I said, I look around at the world and I go, things are getting bad. We are getting collective tribalism like we've never seen before. We are seeing large scale war taking place. We're probably currently in World War III. Nobody wants to talk about it. We have rise of, the spy state at home. People are being criminalized again for associations with groups. They're being targeted. And it only seems like it's ramping up. So if libertarians can't get serious and be hey, we have to push away some of these bad actors in our midst. We have to focus on these core messages. We have to find a way to communicate to one another, even if we have cultural differences. If that can't happen now, then what are we doing, right? Is it something that we're just all going to live in a pipe dream and never have any real impact? I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the libertarian solution to a lot of this stuff is supposed to be that you self-police it through voluntary association and whatnot. It doesn't have to be this rising to the level of something like cancel culture or even that. It doesn't have to be even demonizing the people, but it can just be saying, hey, we don't think this behavior or this messaging is acceptable. It doesn't represent us. I was one of the early, you want to say some of the anti-Mises Caucus people were correct in their predictions. I was, I correct from within the Mises Caucus, predicting that LPNH was going to be a problem, but everything before Reno was just so, they had tunnel vision about just getting the Reno reset done. And so it became a point where they were like, yeah, there's problems, but we're just going to have to tolerate it for now and deal with it after, because we need the numbers. And it's okay. And dealing with it didn't go so well. And then there was a giant, falling out between the Mises Caucus leadership and the LPNH guys. And I tried infamously moderating a sort of a Dr. Phil kind of thing on a X Spaces it was me, Dave, and Heiss and the LPNH guys, and it went absolutely horribly. And it wasn't, the full thing wasn't recorded, but you can find half the recording out there somewhere if you look hard enough. But please don't look hard enough, because I'm embarrassed to. I mean, I guess it was worth trying, but man, it was just an actual. It was a crap show. I feel like.
Can I comment on that though for a second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think there's this, and currently, Kaufman had been on recently on the the Mises Caucus podcast within the last week, and so I question now, is that all that's left? Is that all that's left for them to kind of ally with? And it's kind of a sad distinction, because I think there's a big difference between culturally conservative libertarians that are principled, that really, they live this certain life, and that's the way they want to live for their family, and they want to project it. And most of those people I consider honorable community members. They're, people that I get along with well, even if I disagree on some social things. How is there not currently this aim to distinguish that, right? Like if I was somebody that was a culturally conservative person, and they're saying actually all right libertarians are really, they really care about eugenics, right? And they really care about these sort of toxic interactions, not very Christ-like behaviors in the way they communicate with people and denigrate people, not very Christ-like when it comes to treating people that might live differently than you. And I look at that and I go, that's not what I know from, you know, conservative-leaning libertarians. I never saw Ron Paul behave like that, right? And the way that's kind of the prototypical version of a right cultural libertarian that I think of would be like a Ron Paul type. And, you know, I have family members that are like that. So when I see there being this kind of like saying, oh, well, this is what right libertarianism is, I don't know how other right libertarians aren't trying to be like, actually, we're different than that.
Well,
and I know, like I said, I think you tried. I think you may have tried to do that, but then now why is it coming back up again as like a realignment happening?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of my major frustrations with the Mises Caucus and why I left caucus leadership in my state as an organizer, and kind of being active probably like late 23, and then made a post about it like early 24. And one of the things that drove me away was the whole LPNH thing. I was just like at some point, it's like, and you know what sucks is that earlier iterations of LPNH I thought were fixable, where I was like, hey, I'm really down with some, at least like having one state affiliate kind of experiment with like this sort of like shit posting really edgy stuff. If you keep it to like you're actually just cyberbullying the government and
Yeah.
not being a racist like POS, like like literally my only problems are invoking Holocaust references and telling black people to go back to Africa. Like, can we just like cut that stuff out that is completely useless and garbage? And yeah, I mean, I've contemplated trying to have a conversation with Kaufman. Like he said he was open to doing it, but I just feel like we have fundamentally different worldviews. We don't define right wing the same way because to him, right wing means like, yeah, it does mean
Identitarian.
eugenics. It does mean it's identitarian
Yeah.
in nature. He once told me, like on X, this is up there, that you know Christianity's okay, but it's got a real problem with that whole like, you know, everyone's created in the image of God and forgiveness stuff. I was like, you mean like the core of Christianity? Like what? Like I was like, I just don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know where to go with that when someone is just operating on, you know, and it would, the fact that, you know, he's now the chair of LPNH, which is just, you know, hey, for all you guys complaining about Ben, it's like, you know, Ben was kind of the the last attempt at avoiding a Jeremy Kauffman chairmanship. So there you go.
I mean,
This is what you get now.
he was kind of stuck as an empty suit, though, right? Like any decision that he was trying to make to temper that behavior, obviously he could be outvoted by the people that was around him. So I think what I look at it is like maybe Ben could have been better if he had a actually supportive board around him. Maybe he could have shifted the culture and just make it, because I think there is like a edgy libertarian message that can be had that probably would speak to me more about revolting against the government. Like that I will, you know, I will admit that like during the era before all the takeover and all that, like it wasn't some messaging that was like speaks to me as a person. It still isn't something that speaks to me. And then there's obviously LPNH messaging that speaks against against who I am. But the like I would have been fine with like a very like revolutionary style message of like defending individual liberty actively, like, you know, and like, you know, questionably insurrectionist level against kind of the government that we have.
Or even
I would be
just
fine
like
with that.
or even like the stuff where it's kind of like Ron Paul saying legalize heroin, and it's like when LPNH, like probably their most radical post that's within, I think, the Overton window of what our messaging should be, was when they had the posts about legalizing or abolishing child labor laws. And like, yeah, that's a little bit of an edgy post, but like that's completely defensible beyond, you know, within the libertarian um you know, legal theory and philosophy and understanding economics and talking, you know, opening that up to get people get a little bit outraged and they're paying attention. And then you're like, well, here's why we don't need child labor laws. Here's why we don't need minimum wage laws. And, you know, just open up that conversation. Like that stuff is fine. You know, even like, you know, probably the outer edge is the Meghan McCain post, But even then, I'm like, listen, I get why some people find that in bad taste. But at least then it's like you're just being an edgelord when it comes to being anti-war and anti like authoritarians and the pundits who are, trying to go like I get it. There's something a little bit frustrating about seeing people like just kind of like, oh, um, we're gonna let these people live normal lives with no social consequences after they advocate for like, you know,
Mass
millions of
murder of
people and mass
Iraqis.
murder
Yeah,
across the
yeah,
world. And I
yeah.
get wanting to invoke some kind of social cost on that, which is what that sort of thing was invoked to do. And so it's like, listen, we can have a debate about that, but I'm just not going to lose sleep over that as much as I am the other stuff, which does paint us in a bad way, which does put an albatross uh, around our neck. So it's, definitely like if the Mises Caucus idea was that there was, again, I think this is why I said it. I think there's types of progressive messaging and messengers and libertarians that went away that I don't think the party should go in. But to act like that doesn't happen on the right, I think you got to gatekeep both. I think that there are people who want to, uh, like I don't know, like just I guess to get into an example of the left wing one. I'm not saying there's a bunch of people doing this, but um, like I have a hard time from my perspective, and some people could say it's just my religious views, but I even try to think about this divorced from my um religious views. I think that the whole thing around gender affirming care for minors is kind of a left wing progressive poison pill that I don't like when some libertarians decide to go, hard into the paint on that stuff. Now, I want to distinguish that from like what Chase did, because Chase wasn't really going around like making trans kids his you know, um number one issue, right? And he was actually even against surgeries for minors.
Which is, Trump has come out and been like, without parents'
I know.
consent. So he's like, it's very funny because you still see the trolls, kind of like the MAGA-tarian trolls in spaces, being like, he would have had all the kids transed, and it's like, well, actually, his policy prescriptions were kind of more careful than you would have for a Trump statement. Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that you can obviously look at a complete philosophical perspective of why the government shouldn't be involved in that, and that should always be our answer. It's just that government shouldn't be involved in deciding decisions for kids between their parents. And the way I look at it is that if you can say, hey, well, this is actually bad for a kid, and you're making that judgment from your worldview, then automatically that can be turned against you and say, well, you're not getting vaccines for your kids. That's bad for them. Now we can enforce the government to do it. You're giving them raw milk. That's bad for them. We must come in and guarantee that you're not giving them raw milk. And so like, this is where I look at it and go like, we're blurring the edges here instead of talking to the principle and saying like, keep the government out of it. And if anything, if there is this question of bad actors that are somehow swaying medical decisions, that we need to open up the question of liability, right? That there is, liability and culpability and retribution for if a kid was transitioned, that it came out later in life that they didn't like it, or there was some negative outcome, that they have the right to sue their parents or their doctors. Like, these are questions that still could be answered in the same way that if some kid was drinking raw milk and then years later they have this disease that they've been dealing with forever, or from taking vaccines or not taking vaccines, that they should have the ability to then go and fight for liability against their parents or the doctors that prescribe those sorts of behaviors. That's the reason why, like, I can understand why people will fight hard on this topic. And I understand why worldviews would say like, that's not good. But the point is that we shouldn't be projecting worldviews into policy prescriptions. I think that's the whole point, is that we shouldn't be doing that and go to
Well,
first
right.
principles.
I guess what I just want is that to be consistent, because I basically agree with what you said, which is that I think and I actually made a post about this today. I said, I'm reading it, as a libertarian, I don't want the state in charge of healthcare, period. As a libertarian, I think doctors should not be shielded from liability for performing operations that mutilate people that aren't of sound mind, and especially on children. I don't think that's a controversial take at all. I think that listen, there's going to be some people who think that there are children, I don't have this worldview, but some people think that some children are going to be born trans and they're going to start presenting signs of that early. And it's like, okay, but I still think you got to like I think the right thing to do, not that I would legislate this, but the right thing to do is to let that child develop normally, go through puberty, enter adulthood, and then when they're in a position where they can make more of a decision based on informed consent, developing closer to maturity for their bodies, I think that's more appropriate. I don't think that even parents, like parents should have like a guardianship, like a sort of duty of care for their children. But I feel like there's some things that, like, even as a parent, like, you can't consent for your children on certain things. Like, I don't think we would say that you can consent for your child to, like, have them get married when they're 14 or 15, right? Or enter into, inappropriate physical relationships, especially with, like, someone older than them, right? There's a limit, I think, in libertarian theory on what parents can consent to for their kids, and I think these things apply there too. Now, I don't necessarily want that to be enforced through monopoly government. I think in a free market of healthcare, a lot of this stuff is going to get regulated through just regular market mechanisms that are going to recognize these truths and are going to put really strict limits. Now, maybe there's like, these rare edge cases. And obviously there's things like intersex and biological disorders around hormones and things like that. Where like, I think that's just obviously different. And that's partly why you don't want to legislate this, because the government's not going to pass laws that regulate such things in a way that don't discriminate against cases where people actually legitimately need some kind of medical intervention regarding to their normal development, biologically along their uh you know sexual uh development and organ development and stuff like that, and hormones. um but I feel like there is a certain type of libertarian who leans socially progressive, who hears everything I've been saying and goes like, "No, you're just a bigot and you just hate trans people." And it's like that, maybe to someone like you or other people, that doesn't seem to be as problematic, but it is kind of problematic, I think, towards the goals that I think we both kind of agree with, which is that, like, I really like the idea of a ceasefire on the culture war. It just seems like there's culture war partisans on both sides who actually, like, kind of say they want a ceasefire on the culture war, but then don't actually mean it. And that's where I'm a little bit wary, I guess.
Well, like I will say, like I am definitely on the other side of the culture war on this issue with you. Like I think trans people exist as adults, right? Like I think that they are there. I think that there's probably a biological mechanism to explain it, and I think probably in the future we will have diagnostics that will be able to do that more so than kind of sort of some of the subjective stuff that happens when they're psychologically evaluated now. And if that's the case, and if a trans person exists in adulthood and that there is some biological mechanism, then obviously a medical treatment earlier on to provide a better outcome for somebody in the future, I think that should be okay and allowed. I think you're right, though, that market mechanisms will help figure that out. And I think it will be sort of doctors understanding the liability that if they get it wrong, it will affect their business, it'll affect their wealth, it'll affect all of these other things that will kind of keep things in a better place than maybe the way it is currently. But I think the question there can be applied to like any sort of medical question, right? Let's say there's a disease that is progressing, but it's going to involve an invasive process to be done while you're young. Do you say, well, the parent can't steward that or not? Who's making the decisions on where that kind of boundaries of a guardian over the self-ownership of a child begins and ends? There's clearly some questions there about, and the way I look at it is like, what will cause lasting damage, right? It's like when you think of sexual abuse of children, I don't think there's going to be any dispute around sexual abuse of children is going to cause long-term damage to that child. And I think there is areas where there is dispute around, the idea of if somebody is trans in their later life, when is it appropriate to intervene? What are the levels of intervening? Is it something where it's just really intensive therapy to find out if this is something transient, or is this something real? And like I said, I think there will be eventually a biological understanding, and I think it will be rooted into sort of the development in early gestation. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but like we all start out as the female sex and then we transition. And I think those mechanisms are so complex that there is likely something going on there that is different. And I don't want to demonize somebody because of something that the way I view it is it could be an entirely natural process that, we don't necessarily have any external control over. And I want people to live their best lives no matter who they are. And I don't necessarily want them to feel bad about themselves. Like that's
Yeah,
kind of
I mean,
where I'm
I and I don't want listen, like I think there's a lot of conservatives that market the conservative position on this really badly, and there's definitely such a thing as like transphobia, right? Where people view that they don't just have a different of belief, they don't just have a skepticism towards treatments. They're like, I'm disgusted by this type of person and I hate them. Right? This is where you get like the Michael Knowles, like, I think this needs exterminated from society. And that's not the kind of messaging I want to promote. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people who are trans, I've met people like this. Like, I think I don't know what it's like to live with that kind of discomfort, that kind of sort of like mental stress or trauma that they deal with to varying degrees. But I
yeah,
know for some of them it's particularly hard to overcome. I know people who have undergone transition and that's been better for them. At least that's their subjective experience. I know people who have transitioned and did it for a year or two and then detransitioned, and that was better for them. And I think there's actually something to say about like for adults, especially this is what I still think it's kind of hard to justify this for children, but that's maybe a side debate for another time. But I feel like for adults, it's almost like you have to allow that freedom because for some people, um, like I know for some people, they would have never figured out like the journey was kind of like them figuring these things out. And if the government had gotten in the way with certain like bans, that wouldn't have been helpful towards their long term growth and figuring out like, the best way for them to live with their differences. But I think like the human body's super complicated. Brain chemistry super complicated.
yeah,
And it would not surprise me that there'd be biological markers that like maybe some subset of the population who maybe correlates a lot with the trans community, are born with some kind of like thing that when that change happens in utero and that development process that like uh I don't know, there's just like certain markers or certain genes or certain things in the brain that don't correlate the same way and it causes this dysphoria. I think where a lot of conservatives like myself land on this issue is just a skepticism towards medical intervention as being pushed as this sort of like the the first option, right? And I tend to think, I guess I'm more of like a natural treatment person. I'm actually kind of like um very wary about the healthcare industry. COVID only made my skepticism worse. I'm probably more in the I'm not like ideologically anti-vax, but I'm kind of one of the people that's like, I don't think I don't know. I think there's some people that are like vaccines save the world, and there's other people that are like vaccines will kill you. And I'm kind of like, I think vaccines work. I don't think that they are as necessary as modern science tries to push and tell us, as it's kind of like religious fervor. But yeah, I think just on the trans issue, like I just I wonder, like I think this about my own mental. Like I have depression. I have diagnosed depression and ADHD. I had a bunch of medical stuff pushed on me and none of that worked. Turned out that like changes in diet and counseling, certain supplements, that was better for me. Now, I know I'm kind of like projecting my own experience out on a whole group of people with a different set of problems, but what I guess I want to get you know, your perspective on this is like why is someone like myself who is approaching this with a skepticism, who's like not trying to be hateful? There's a whole bunch of progressives, and there's not just statist progressives, it's libertarian progressives who just seem very intolerant towards someone with my point of view, who say like, no, you have to believe exactly what we believe about trans people and what's best for them. Even if you're like tolerating them in a legal sense, that's not enough. You have to think that, like you have to use their pronouns, and I do use pronouns out of respect, but it's like, and you have to believe it. Like you have to believe if this person says, I was born a biological male, but now I identify as a girl. It's like I have to actually believe that and affirm that. Um, even if, even if I don't actually agree and affirm it in my own, belief system, right? And it's not about like hating them. For me, it's like I'm just not convinced that this is the best way to deal with this problem of, I think you would agree. I think it's a convergence of mental health and you know, physiology that we don't really understand yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's kind of really shown yet. I know that there is some brain scan studies that show that there's a difference. I don't know if that would be considered a like mental health disorder or if it's just a difference, right? It's a chemical difference that happens. Um, I guess the question is like, what would you define as a normal person? I think people dealing with depression is still a normal human phenomenon, and I think the stigmatization of it is bad. And so I think the same thing when somebody is different, making it this kind of big problem is not good. I don't think it helps people that are dealing with it at all. Now, I think the reason why you'll have maybe progressive libertarians coming after you is that there's this fear that if the government is cracking down on the expression of people, that you will not be an ally in the defense of those people. And like the way I look at it is, I am not Christian. I'm pretty anti-establishment religion, in general. I've seen some negative side effects of the unquestioned authority that is given to religious leaders. And so, but I will, if there is a government action against any of the religions, even ones that I think are like kind of out there and crazy, I would be there defending them and standing up for it. And I think the question and the worry is,
Even
would you do the same?
Scientologists? No.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's limits here, okay? No, but seriously, like I look at it as, I think that's the main thing is that if the kind of statement that's coming out of right libertarianism, kind of unchecked from like LPNH types or some of these other toxic types, is that like you're not a human if you do this, or that you're not valuable, or that you're a freak that must be ostracized from society.
No,
Yeah. I know that that's not you, but I'm saying that if that's the image that they imagine as right libertarianism, and then the question comes is there's government action kind of going against trans people, then like, are you going to be an ally in that fight for them and their ability to express themselves? I think that's the main distinction. Do you have a funny comment or something?
Protect everyone except Mormons. Hey, listen, man. Listen, I have great Mormon friends. I know this is a little bit of a provocative joke, but I always say like Mormonism is my favorite Christian fan fiction. Okay, like I just find it highly entertaining. Now, listen, I think that's fair. Like, there's definitely right or self-identified right-wing libertarians who are not allies in that fight against infringements on LGBT rights, but are actively hostile and like cheering on government crackdowns on that stuff. And I've, like people can go search my timeline, like back when there was a shooting and it was said that the trans person was the shooter, and after the Charlie Kirk shooting when they said, oh, it was related to transgender, like there's been this big push over the last year or two to say like, we need to classify transgenderism as a mental illness and then take away the rights to own guns. And I have been just like screaming at the top of my lungs, no, like that is the, absolute horrible idea. And, now sometimes I'm saying, listen, like I'll make multiple defenses of it. Like one defense is just the pragmatic, like, hey, Christians, we believe we have a relationship with a guy who we say, lived 2,000 years ago and died and rose again. Now he lives in our heart. So like, like be careful about saying the government can label something as a mental illness and take your rights away. You might not like where that goes. The other thing just being that like a right's only a right if everyone has it, and it's just like, just because someone is, it's a really slippery slope too, to be like, because someone takes medications or because someone lives differently than you or identifies a certain way, like it's just a complete non-starter. Also like the whole like pre-crime thing, just like you haven't committed anything, but because, so yeah, it's just, absolutely. And I've lost followers for that. So like I do see the problem. It does. And listen, there are people on my side of the aisle who I think just think that everyone who's not a right-wing libertarian is just some like unhinged, like anarcho-commie tanky or something, right? I mean, it's just like, so I'm not saying there's not a equal, like there's a problem, which this is why I wanted to have you on. Cause it's like, I feel like these kind of conversations need to happen where it's just kind of like, there are hopefully, I want to be hopeful about this. Hopefully there are actually a lot more right-wing ish libertarians like me out there. And there's also a lot of more, of the progressive leaning libertarians out there who like, if we just realize that like we're not these other like worst iterations, then we could probably work together a lot more effectively. But I think there is this probably fear from both ways that it's just like, because like as um, everything granted that there's definitely been bad action and bad actors from, I guess, quote unquote, my side of the aisle. You've seen that there's definitely been bad actors and bad actions, um, from the other side towards towards people like me. And I don't know, maybe some of that was just because of the Mises Caucus stuff, but at the same time, with the stuff that happened to me, it definitely wasn't just the Mises Caucus stuff. It was the like people found out my view on transgenderism and then made threats against my family associated with that. So um,
Well, I think
so yeah.
there's an era probably where there was a lot more lack of nuance. I think there's probably been maybe a shift away from that now. I think there should be nuance in these conversations. Like I said in the beginning, there should not be painting with broad brushes. Like I like to call out specific individuals that I think are really negative in their interactions, and I like to interact with people that would be culturally conservative, but that are principled libertarians that don't kind of espouse this toxic behavior, even though I live very differently. And like, some of my family members, but like I have two brothers, one of which is a Ron Paul style minarchist, sort of right wing libertarian. And I have another one that's kind of a very progressive minarchist libertarian. And I'm like the burn it all down anarchist. And so like there's this, but we all get along. And I think we would be able to interact kind of in good faith with one another. And I think I kind of want to see that happen within the party. And that I do kind of want to see a resurgence of kind of good-natured Ron Paul types that will kind of collaborate across the various ideologies and find a way to do this thing where we actually move the fucking needle more than sort of selling out to Trump, the free one person.
No, 100%. And I think, yeah, I guess, and listen, I kind of even hate these days to talk about some of these issues, like the whole trans kid thing, because like I also recognize that, like, sorry, I'm saying like a lot. Some in the comments are making fun of me for how much I say like, whatever. But it's just my own particular, I could go a bunch instead. So the I don't want to talk about these issues as much these days because I recognize that these are I think they're real issues, but I think that there's definitely a concentrated effort by the media and by politicians on certain sides of the aisle to blow them up as a
yeah,
way to make us just way more uh antagonized at each other, so we're fighting each other over these more obscure issues while we're all drowning in debt, while we're taxed to death to fund the wars that are killing brown people overseas, all the libertarian memery thrown in there. So I don't want to I don't want to fall victim to that. I know you think that that was kind of the motivating factor behind why a lot of people voted for Trump. Maybe it was sort of like background, like, considerations. I don't know that it was like the primary thing that motivated some people to vote for Trump. But it's definitely something I think people are falling victim to more and more. And I want us to move away from that. But I'm also in this position where I'll just admit it's tough for me because I guess my perspective, and I have my own biases, I'm sure, and my own blind spots, but I'm sure there's this equal fear on both sides, and I'm just afraid that the whole let's have a ceasefire on the culture war and not fight it will end up, with the LP suddenly promoting a bunch of things in the opposite direction, and then I have to kind of figure out how to do that and worry that I'm not going to be able to do my own thing without having people come after me for doing it. And I feel like this is something where we agree, even though we're on different sides of this, because it's a tricky balance. You don't want to be like a useful idiot for the state and fall into the culture war. But I'm sure we both agree that culture is sort of connected to liberty, and having a positive culture versus a negative culture is one of those ingredients that goes towards creating a free society and a vibrant libertarian movement. So I think we agree on that premise. We might disagree on which cultures are better than other ones, though, and that does make it makes it it makes it harder, even if we have the same impulse and we want to be like, you know common allies in our fight for sort of the same political ends. but it's like, do you have space to promote the culture that you think is more conducive to liberty? And do I have the space to do it, or are those going to butt heads? And that is something that I'm still trying to work out if there's a solution to that. If we can operate on the same team in the same space, yet promote different cultures and not have that be something that leads to friction and conflict. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think some of it is communicating with one another in kind of a, some of the original ideas we had for the Libertarian Party was that we wanted to have a multi-caucus based board. We do not want monocaucus. We want more distributed decision making that allows people to form a consensus, even if it's hard fought consensus, even if it makes us, maybe not hitting everybody's wants, but if we can find a way to have real consensus around things, that would be good, right? And that it doesn't become an enemy if you don't win on one thing versus another with the way something happened. But it's like, hey, we're trying to figure this thing out in good faith. That would be ideal. But I understand it that there's like this question of like, how do we allow for some vastly different ideas? The way I'll say it is this, right? Like I believe in the idea of voluntary DEI, that we should be uplifting communities that are hurt. I don't believe it should be based on race or things like that, but I think that there are communities across the country that have been downtrodden by both state action and social behaviors. And I think that libertarians should be voluntarily going to those scenarios and trying to uplift communities. And I think it's how we should be better neighbors, etc. I'm not going to sit here and promote that with the language that it is used through the party, right? Because if I say, hey, we actually do believe in DEI, but just voluntarily, that's going to make a lot of people that might be right-leaning very angry. But I could probably write up a version of that, of a statement that you would agree with, without using any sort of those buzzwords that seem to really anger somebody. And those are conversations that should be happening, right? And I've made kind of sort of the argument before about this, like the idea that there are cycles, that I believe it's a biological function where communities get stuck in cycles. And it's the reason why you have trailer parks where they, have, domestic violence in generation after generation. And there's reasons why there's drug addiction generation after generation. And I don't look at it as a hard stopped, this is a gene problem. I look at it as it's a more adaptive process, and that we should be trying to fix that as a society in any way that we can. And it should be done voluntarily, because that's how you actually get real positive change, is people that believe in it going and voluntarily trying to help. So this is my point, is that there is ways to have these conversations that do work for everybody. But if the minute somebody even says that, like if I said, hey, I believe in voluntary DEI, and then first thing you say is, well, fuck you, communist Antifa bastard, like you're not supposed to be in this party, and I'm going to remove you, then it's over, right? And that's what I mean by, like, there are some bad actors that will label anything as the other, and then if you're not on their side, there's a problem. So I don't know. I think there's ways to do it. I'm hopeful that it can be done. I think the problem really is that we've lost so many people from it being toxic for so long, that there's like trying to pull people back and say, how do we promote this? How do we allow for these things that we want to be communicated in a way that's kind of good for everybody? That's my biggest worry, is that people have been kind of toxified out. And I'll give an example. Like, I've talked to a bunch of people that were trying to help in the LPNH takeover, and many people are just like, I can't be involved with that because it's so toxic. It's a risk to my career to even show up to a convention and tie my name to it and put it out there publicly that I gave money to this organization, right? Like, that is not, that's not how you end up having a conducive collaborative nature between different versions of libertarian. It'd be the same thing where if it was like somebody was saying, yeah, actually, that kid has more self-ownership. If you failed to steward their kind of their want to become trans, that's actually wrong. That they still self-own themselves, and they must be allowed to promote the gender affirming care for their child. Like, that would be equally as if I said that, and now you're like, I can't be associated with this, right? Some sort of forced community taking of a child from a family because they're not doing that, even if it wasn't a governmental one, if it was a community-based one, that would be equally, I think, as offensive to the other side of this than it is to have the kind of forced eugenics and toxic messaging out of LPNH that would just keep people away. And it's not something I want to see. And hopefully people can wake up to this and say, the only way it's going to get better is if enough people are willing to risk that, show up to the conventions, make the changes. Because I don't see Jeremy ever acting in good faith. I just don't. I think I think his whole purpose is to shift things a certain way, and I think it affects all libertarians, but I think it really gives a negative light to a lot of right libertarians that then causes more division between this kind of socially progressive and conservative.
Well, beyond just Jeremy's, harmful, toxic beliefs, his ideas about Libertarian Party, like activism and how to use the party, are completely antithetical to like any vision of the party because he's kind of like anti-party. He thinks that the LP should like basically like he he has such a New Hampshire focused idea of how to do politics that it's all flowing towards like the other 49 states are doomed, and so everyone just needs to move to New Hampshire, and we need to just sort of like, and listen, there's something to he's doing a very like sort of bastardized version of the Isaiah's job, gather the remnant idea, which is that you message so hardcore that you're going to offend a bunch of people and they're going to fall away, and then what you're left with is like the really hardcore people that are going to be down for the fight. And there's something to that in some fashion, but like the way he's doing it is it's not attracting the right type of libertarian, I guess. But even that, like, then I feel like even when we go after Jeremy in New Hampshire, then I feel like, okay, but now are we just falling back into this sort of pattern again? Because I don't. Believe me, I'm not saying I'm okay with the messaging Jeremy is doing, but I also feel like there's a lot of people who think that Jeremy, and I'll be honest, I'm not saying I'm 100% sure. I'm 90% sure Jeremy's serious is what he says, but there's some people that say like, no, man, it's just they're like Trumpers with Trump, like it's just 5D chess, like he's just saying all these offensive, wild things just to like be provocative and trigger people, and just like he is such a maximalist on like right wing libertarianism, and he wants to make all the left wing and even center libertarians go away and just have it be right wing libertarians and have everything just be New Hampshire oriented. They're not willing to play on the same team. They're not willing to promote a national strategy. At least that's not the vision that Jeremy's pushing. So it's it's harmful. And I like beyond just the sort of like wasting money in something or like being worried about losing your job. I mean, it's just, I gotta be honest, my biggest black pill of the party right now and getting back involved is that it just seems like, and I guess I own some, again, I feel like some people give me too much credit for my role in this, but I'll claim some credit that like, I guess I played a role in messing things up, and now things seem so messed up. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know how we go about fixing it. I think it's admirable what you guys are trying to do, but it's I don't know. I want to believe in the LP because and maybe this rings hollow for some people because I voted for Trump. Listen, I never voted Republican before in my life. It was the one time I did, kind of did it like it was slightly on a whim last minute because I kind of got caught up in the moment and thought like, all right, maybe the right's finally learned their lesson. Maybe like Trump will actually do some good things, and they're quoting Ron Paul and all that. I'm like, I don't know, like, I had reservations, but I was like, I guess I want to see where this goes. Maybe some good will come out of it. Now I'm like, more than I ever was before, the GOP is doomed. I made a post the other day, I don't know if you saw it, where I said, I will not vote Republican ever again, and not even if Massey runs. And I love Thomas Massey. If Thomas Massey wants to run for the LP, I will go and door knock every door in my county for Thomas Massey running on the LP. But for the GOP, I just think it's a lost cause. I think the Republican Party might be worse than the Democratic Party at this point. And I say that as a right winger, but I honestly think the Republican Party at this point is worse, more statist, more authoritarian, more compromised. And I feel like there's just anyone who is like, well, the LP is too small, so the only option is to try to make the GOP better. I'm just like, you're deluded. You're deluding yourself. You can't. Yep. It is firmly entrenched in the swamp. I will never vote Republican again, not even if it's Thomas Massey, not even if it was Dave Smith, not put anyone in there. I will not vote for them. Also, anyone good who could win will not win. That's the other thing. Like, they're just not going to get they will never get past the primary. So all that to say that because of that, I want to believe the LP can be effective. I'm just not sure we're ever going to get out of our own way. Not to mention, we have to get out of our own way and then fight the state just to get on the ballot. It does just feel like we're fighting a really, really uphill battle. And so I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I know, you were more of the anti-politic anarchist, and now you're trying something different. So,
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I'm still kind of the anti-politic libertarian and anarchist. I still don't know if this is something that can be solved through voting. I kind of I am hopeful that it can be, because the other option is not great. And I think anybody who deludes themselves in thinking like this is going to be some glorious kind of return to liberty after fighting to get it back physically is, they have not really thought about what will happen. They have not thought about the loss that will happen and all that. And maybe it's required. Maybe it is true that the tree must be watered. I don't know. You know, I look at it like we have to have a long-term aim to really change the culture within the LP. And if we can do that, then we will start getting people to come back again, because nobody wants to come into an organization that's already tiny, that's already insular, and then be stuck around a bunch of toxic people that can't communicate with one another, when all they're used to when in the duopoly is this idea of toxic interactions between one another, and they're trying to escape away from that. They come into the party, and then it's just toxic behavior. And I'm still, like I said, I'm not like a party person. I'll show up to convention and I'll vote to try to get a more distributed board and whatever. But like, I don't want to sit on a board. I don't want to, like, unless I absolutely have to, I don't want to do it. It's not something that excites me. I want the party to be functioning in a positive culture that allows liberty organizations that orbit the party to go out, do work that then kind of shares that culture more broadly. So you think of things like You Are the Power, which is obviously they say they're nonpartisan, right? And they are the way they operate, but it's clearly based on libertarian principles, that they're going out there trying to fight for the common person. And like, that should be something that's promoted broadly. There should be many, many of them that orbit it. And real world libertarian activism should be kind of promoted and projected by the party. And I think if you do that long enough, people will see the positive effects that we have when we do things voluntarily. And eventually more and more people will be brought on and go, oh, I've always worried about poor people and sick people and who's going to help them if they're poor and sick. And then if they see voluntary mutual aid networks actually form up and actually help people, or people just signing a letter that says, if I wasn't taxed, I would still give to help other people. I would still donate to charity. I would still work to help my community. If those sorts of things happen and people saw that there could be a real another way to deal with society's ills that are libertarian based, then I think over time, in the long term, we could win. But we have to get over the hurdle that we're in right now.
You're really onto something about this mutual aid thing, because let me tell you, there's a lot of people like that I've talked to across the country, and even like people I know in my church, who have all kind of said the same thing. They're more maybe culturally conservative, but they tend to not be libertarian or vote libertarian. Some of them even vote Democrat, because they say, I've seen too much suffering in the world, and I used to be more liberty minded, but I just don't think that the market and charity alone can make up the difference. And that is a big hurdle for some people. I get that. Like, I came from the left more because of some of those reasons. I was more market skeptical. I didn't think that I thought we had to have some kind of redistributive model to take care of the poor. And I think that although I wish we could just convince everyone through a sound explanation of Austrian economics as to why that won't work, why there's diminishing returns on that stuff, why it's, I mean, at this point, it's also like, I want the people who are covering up the Epstein files to give money to the poor. It's another kind of, weird cognitive dissonance thing to get over.
Can you take care of the kids if you're bombing kids? Like, is that like a thing that you can do? Yeah.
Right, exactly. But beyond that, I think we need to have more proof of concept, especially attached to the libertarian movement. And I'd also want that, I want Christians in the church to step up and do that more too. But yeah, I think the more we do that, and we have organizations like You Are the Power who are helping people like that, I think that's an amazing mechanism to advocate for liberty. And if the LP can be like the central hub where like all these different things kind of come together under some kind of political banner that runs a candidate once every 4 years, I do see some long-term potential there. But yeah, we just kind of have to get out of our own way. A couple super chats from Philip that are, I guess, relevant to what we were saying. He said, "I'm biased. Larry Sharp is good on the culture wars." And he said, "This is the year to focus on 50 state access." He was talking about New York here, ballot access in New York. And yeah, listen, I understand Larry has to kind of run as a Republican this year. It's I get the New York ballot laws just suck. Larry was on the show a couple weeks ago. We had a whole conversation about that. Larry's a good guy, nothing against him. And yeah, like there might be still some limited instances where running as a Republican locally makes there's some marginal utility. Probably also running as a Democrat locally has some marginal utility in certain counties and races based on state laws.
I know a constable that used to be involved in the LPPA, and he had to run as a duopoly candidate. I won't say which party, but like he had to run as one of them. But I interacted with him when I was going to do. There's a local business and nonprofit in my area that had an injunction against their property, a bunch of horrible stuff. But I was in the local township building, and asking them, where does his authority come from? And he got the right answer, right? Is that if any authority that he can have is delegated directly from us. So like clearly, there are people that can run as that. Will they ever espouse my version of libertarian? No. Are they closer to what I want? Yes. So then like that's not, I don't necessarily look at that as a bad thing, but I think we need to get serious about the long-term growth of the political party. If there's going to be a strategy at all about showing that the world can exist without a coercive government, it needs to be long-term. It cannot just be just running politicians. It cannot be just doing activism or messaging. It cannot be just trying to leverage the other parties. That's not inspiring enough if you just do any of them. You need to basically bring everybody in and give space for people to kind of operate the things that they want, and have shared victories. Like they have to be a shared victory across the board. Like I disagree a lot with kind of some of the takes of the Defend the Guard people where they're talking about using National Guard against people that are, being able, like the way in which they could be used as like a standing army inside the United States. But if those bills get passed, I would think that is a win for a libertarian process, even if I disagree with the people that are operating it. They are constitutionalists, libertarians. But I still think it's a good thing that should be as a shared victory. That should be happening across all the versions of libertarian if we're getting wins or pushing these various goals. And the fact that we don't do that, and the fact that we kind of just allow them to be separated, I think is a sad thing. And hopefully we can move towards the right direction. And I'm still like up in the air of like, will it happen? I think the more of these sort of conversations, the more likely they will be. I think, You Are the Power does great work. Freeze in the chat here talking about how he raised, like, while doing that live show. I think there are positive things happening in the liberty movement. And like, clearly there are some negative things, and clearly the world we're living in is hyper authoritarian right now. But that's our greatest moment to like wake people up, I think. And I think we've been not seizing on it as well as we should, in the same way we didn't seize it super well during COVID. And like we can't keep letting these like easy opportunities to show why our principles are better just keep going to waste over and over and over again.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I feel a couple things as we're winding down here that I guess I want to talk about briefly too. I mean, something that I'm struggling with moving forward, trying to figure out how to get something like a positive culture back, is that I'm in this weird space where, like, on one hand, like I'll give you a point where I think we're in firm agreement, and then a point where it becomes a struggle for me. I have lost the taste for the takeover stuff. I think it was an absolute mistake. I think it was such a waste of time, a waste of money. It burned so many bridges. It hurt the party. And there are ideas from the Mises Caucus, things that were tried, things that were proposed that I still think like I like that idea. I think there's merit to that. But it was wrong to ever feel like, well, the people who don't aren't on board with us, they need to be run out of the party or stonewalled or work around. We got to be Machiavellian about this. I'm not with that anymore. Listen, there are some people who are going to be upset that I ever was, and I get that, and maybe you don't trust me now, and I get that too. Um, those are conversations that can be had. I hope over time. Listen, I've actually, not because some people have said I have to. I was actually already doing this. I mean, I haven't done anything with the party in a while. Like I was not. I haven't been to a state convention in like 2 years. I haven't been to the national convention. Like I've stepped away from the party, and I'm just kind of like talking about the party as an outsider looking in, because I was just like, I need to be out of this for a while because I've contributed to just too much of why this is a giant mess. I'm also, I mean, since Free just brought this up, he said he's blocked by the Mises Caucus. I'm definitely not happy with the extent to which, the Mises Caucus does not, yeah, they're still operating in this kind of like friend enemy distinction. And I still have, listen, I actually hung out today for like several hours with one of my closest friends who is, high up in the Mises Caucus. And I'm not gonna say who he is, but um, we're still really good friends. And so this is where I'm getting at. I understand the frustration some people have with Angela, with Heiss, even with Dave, with the Mises Caucus in general. And yet, a lot of those people are still my friends. I think they're misguided. I think some of the things they're doing are wrong, or that they did are wrong. Um, but it does get frustrating when it feels like there's some people, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but there's some people who will never let it rest. That like it's not enough for me to have recanted on my vote of Trump. It's not enough for me to have even say like, here's where I depart from the Mises Caucus, and I still even agree with some of their ideas, but I'm not down for this takeover strategy anymore. But it's like, nope, that's not even enough. It's like you must be actively anti-Mises Caucus. You have to publicly denounce Angela. You have to publicly denounce Heiss. You have to publicly denounce Dave, or whatever. I will publicly denounce Rechtenwald, but that's for completely separate reasons. Um, you know, so he went a little bit too far down the JQ stuff. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, something where I have a problem, because it's like I get why you could be frustrated by things that they did, or even maybe the things that they're still doing. But it's like, hey, I don't agree with some of the things that they're even still doing. But I don't know, they're still my friends. Like at some point, like, don't friendships run a little bit deeper than politics? And it's like I also want to persuade them as my friends, as people who I think have actually, if they got past this sort of, if they abandoned this strategy, it's like I think they could still be a positive force for liberty in the world and in the party. So it's like it's not enough I publicly express my disagreements with one. I have to hate them. I have to think they're the worst evil people in the world and like go to war against them now. Like, because like that's the worry I've had about LPA is, and I think you guys have done okay, but there's been a couple instances where I think you guys have maybe even miscalculated a little bit, where it does turn into sometimes resembling what I saw from like the Fakertarians, where it did become this like, you guys aren't just trying to unify the party. It's like, no, now we're identifying as the anti-Mises Caucus faction of the party. And that I think you would agree, you guys want to avoid that, because that just continues the
Yeah.
kind of cycle.
I mean, I think we've publicly kind of made the statement that like we are not anti-Mises Caucus member. We are anti-me tox. So like the toxic behavior of like it's either my party or it's nobody's party. That sort of behavior. The idea that like they will gum up the works in that Machiavellian way. Like I'm sure you've watched some of the LNC stuff where it's just nothing but like resistance to it, trying to kind of peel back certain call outs for when the idea of trying to fight to get the sort of investigation into the McCardle stuff, like that the fight of that is never ending. Like they've tried to bring it up 6 times, it keeps getting voted and saying like, no, we affirm our investigation. And like all of that, you just have to go, okay, something bad happened, accept it, right? Like, it just accept that something bad happened. And like the way I think of it is like they did a disservice by putting McCardle as the chair, right? Like I think that did the whole caucus a disservice, because like now it's like it's not only saying we have a friend enemy distinction, it's like we don't even give a shit about it at all, and we're going to put this person that we know is going to be hyper polarizing into the control of this caucus. And even if the caucus does some good things, like now it's going to be tainted by that, which would obviously, I think, for members that still believe in some parts of the strategy or whatever, it's going to make it pretty bad, right? Like you're going to have people that are hyper polarized because they have years of like a trauma response of like this party that they helped build maybe for decades, basically
listen,
collapsing, you know?
I totally get that. And listen, say what you want about the whole JFC and the whole freedom calls and all that. I
Yeah.
don't want to relitigate that stuff other than to say that I do think mistakes were made. I think bylaws were broken.
Yeah.
And Angela knows that I think she and Austin didn't do things correctly there.
See, but that
Now I
even
think
that statement alone, like you are able to do that, and I think largely because you have kind of gotten out of this idea that you need to be an ideological lockstep. And I think that's the problem, is that there are still some people that feel they need to be an ideological lockstep. And I just don't think that that's something that promotes collaboration. If you have to be an ideological lockstep in the
no,
same way,
sure, I
like
agree. Yeah, I agree.
so I
There's
think that
definitely
there's a distinction there between you and maybe somebody that's still in that ideological lockstep.
but I also think that, like, I think there's some people that try to take it away from her, and I think that was wrong. I think Angela did play a at least important role in helping to get Ross Ulbricht free, and I think she's been playing an important role to try to get other political prisoners free, and I think actually Angela feels like that's her thing now, and I've even said, like, I kinda do agree with you, that's kinda your thing now. I think you should do that with the connections you've made, and I actually feel like she would do that better if she wasn't chair of the caucus, so it's like, it's like, I don't it's like but it's like, again, there are some people, and maybe they're the minority of people, but there's some people who have literally, and I'm sure you know some of who I'm talking about, who like they make it their mission to uh like bring me up and talk about me on their posts or podcasts or whatever, and be like, Jacob can't be trusted because he won't condemn Angela or he won't condemn Heiss. And it's just like, to me, that's just as like, yeah, I get it. There's a some
But
people
you
could
but
call
you
it a
did
cult,
you
like,
did you did condemn them though. Like you already said, like, I don't like what they did.
but that's
That
not
is
condemn, like, I have said I disagree. I think that certain actions they did were wrong. That's different than condemning a person and being like, this person is horrible and my enemy now, and I have to,
yeah.
like, I think people are complicated. I think that there are people who can have they can even think that their hearts are in the right place, they're doing the right thing, and they can simultaneously be doing some things that I think are really good and oriented in a way that I wanna support. And I also think that they can have blind spots and make mistakes and not realize that they've made mistakes, right? And have cognitive dissonance or rationalizations. And it's like, and that's where I stand on a lot of the people who are still in the caucus. And I do think there is a toxic problem of like this. You feel like you have to toe the caucus line, right? And you're not allowed to deviate. I butted head with leadership a lot. They never kicked me out for it. They kicked some others out for it, and they block people for it. I'm not condoning any of that. I think that's done nothing but hurt them and hurt the party. But there's this equal opposite thing where it's like now the thing is like, well, it's not enough for you to disagree with the caucus if you're not going to reflexively on command condemn these people and condemn the caucus. Like, I'm not saying you're doing that, but
Yeah.
there's people who are like, uh, I guess at least within the LPA orbit, who still kind of like expect that kind of thing. And that makes it frustrating to move forward as well, because then it's like, I'm like, my message to both sides, if there's two sides you want to put it just for simplicity's sake, is like, I'm not playing this game. I'm not playing the game of getting in and condemning people. I will take actions. If you say, do you agree with this action? Nope, I don't agree with that action. Do you agree with this platform change? No, I don't agree with that platform change. Right? That's the way I operate and do things, because I think that's the best way to move forward towards a culture where you move away from infighting and towards the things we agree on, which is you do things through consensus building and through uh, building relationships and dialoguing and workshopping things. But we're never going to get out of that if we just trade, you know, one faction dominating and hating on half of the party for, that just being a never-ending seesaw.
Well, I think the distinction is, first off, like, obviously LPA, we don't have any demands of our people. We have people that believe vastly different things. I get into arguments with, Kyle and Amanda on stuff all the time, but like, we're like, hey, we're still working towards the same goal. Let's keep doing it.
We can't help it that Kyle's wrong all the time.
Well, yes, I mean, that's true. It's true, and he does every tech thing both extremely well. And then when it, sometimes it'll go wrong, and then I get to blame it on him, even though he does a million fucking things in the background that never go wrong. But I think the question becomes like this: like, some of our initial kind of discussions was, we want all these different factions to be represented. But that the people that are coming in under those different factions have to have a certain buy-in, and that buy-in is the idea that, like, we all should be welcome. And so if one version or caucus is representing it as still that, no, that's not the way it is, and if they still stick to this strategy of it's only us that must do this, everyone else is wrong, then you hurt the ability of forming that, right? Like, and I think that's the problem, is that if you're still promoting this idea of, like, we must have an echo chamber, we must block out everybody else, we must do this, then it becomes hard to say, like, hey, you're also involved in this. Whereas I look at it like, hey, if there's some individual that's still involved, or like some of the original strategy, like, come and talk. But this idea of, we are going to be the ones that operate this, and we're going to have this monocaucus rule, because that's what we want to do, then it's hard for them to interface in sort of our vision of the party, where there is multiple kind of ideologies and factions working together in good faith. It's hard to believe that if your entire organizational strategy is one of dominating and taking over, that you are going to play the game with us, or our ideas. Let's all talk there. Do you see how there's a reason why I think there's still some pressure there, is because some of the biggest struggles currently in the party seem to be like a gumming up the works, because they are not the ones operating the entirety of the party anymore. And so that's where I would leave it, is that, like, if that went away, I think a lot of the kind of counter response from maybe some members in LPA, maybe some outside of it, would go away. But maybe I'm being naive in that, but that's kind of my perspective.
No, I think that's fair. I can appreciate where you're coming from with that. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly listen, it's a mixed bag. I feel like I'm not in the caucus anymore, but like I know so many people, and I still get to like hear about like things going on in the caucus and in different, states and whatnot. And it, like, I think that there's a lot more people that I think you might realize who are like, even though you might think, well, because Angela's chair and maybe the top down message is still takeover, there's still a lot of people who are just showing up in committees and working with people who are not of the same caucus. And really, that's been true the whole time for the most part. I mean, I can't call, even when like the Mises caucus took over PA, I can't recall one time where I served on a committee where the entire committee was just Mises caucus people. Like, we always had to work with people who were outside of the caucus. Like, our treasurer, like, we never, I don't think we had, I think we had like for like 6 months once a Mises caucus treasurer in LPPA. And other than that, it was usually non-caucus people. I think his name was God, I'm forgetting his name. He's one of the old seasoned guys here in LPPA, and he's been having health problems recently, and it makes me feel worse about it forgetting his name, because I should know it. I'm just bad with names. But he was like even like a anti-Mises caucus person, but he served on the LPPA board as treasurer for years, and it was actually a very good working relationship. So it's like, I feel like maybe people who only know certain like experiences of the Mises caucus from like, national or from whatnot, have a very maybe limited view of it. Like, but I guess I can appreciate where the other side's coming from on this too. I guess I was going to end on this and then give you the last word, because we're uh, about out of time. Yeah, I want there to be more consensus making, and I want, uh, listen, I definitely have harsh work. Like, I have worries and concerns and skepticisms, I guess, towards maybe, again, I'm just for sake of simplicity, like your side, just in a broad sense. But I definitely have harsh words for, I guess, broad sense my side. And things definitely, I'm not saying it's all like, well, you guys just need to change and then we'll be better. No, there's definitely people uh, that need to learn the lesson of the last 6 years. And I think they need to have humility. Like we sold this whole takeover thing as we have to be this scorched earth because you guys are screwing it up. We know how to run this stuff, and we're going to come in and it's going to be awesome, right? And we're just going to have all this influx of money and all this influx of membership, and we're going to have this really awesome presidential campaign that's going to just grow the party. Like we know how to do it. There was this, and that was part of what justified the takeover was this faith in that idea, this idea that like we actually know what to do and we're going to come in and do it. And like, if you guys are going to be on our way, then we just have to brute force you out of the way and you'll just forgive us later because we'll be doing so awesome. But as soon as it became apparent a year in, and 2 years in, that we're not doing awesome, that actually we're screwing everything up.
Yeah.
Well, you got to have humility. At some point, you got to admit you were wrong. And there are, I think, too many people on the Mises Caucus side who aren't willing to do that self-reflect and realize that, like, nope, we got it wrong. We actually didn't know what we were doing. We actually made the party worse. And that is definitely something that more people on the Mises Caucus side need to actually reckon with for things to move forward. And I do hope that happens. So any closing words, Phil? Anything you want to plug before we hop off?
Yeah, I would say, like, you can find us on Twitter at LP_allies. You can check out our website, lpalliance.com. We also run a media journal called the Torch.media. We are trying to do things, kind of outside of the party, but also inside of the party, because we look at this as really both the party structure problems, but also the culture, and trying to show that we're doing things right. That is not just we're going to, our vision is going to magically make things better. We don't necessarily think that, right? We think that it's still going to be a struggle to make things better. And if you want to help in that process, get involved. We probably will, we've been largely completely non-hierarchical. So if you want to do something, if you have a project that you are interested in the libertarian space, if you have a paper or a philosophical question you want to discuss, you can reach out to us, and we will publish your work as long as it's not written by AI. And Amanda will edit it. But I think if we can do that, and if we can kind of set a cultural standard, that things can get better. And I hope that this conversation today, and I hope that my interactions with you prior, Jacob, has shown that I am not maybe this version of person that you've been kind of alluding to, where I'm making some sort of cultural demand of you to work together. I hope that that's showing there, even if some members that are associated with us are dealing with much harder problems. I think in Michigan, you might be right that there's going to be a long fought battle
if
there.
anyone has an excuse to be a little bit jaded, it's Michigan.
Yeah, so that's my point, is that those people are they are going to be a very specific way. And so if those members give some slack there, and maybe things can eventually kind of equal out between the two sides there. If the other side came with the ideology of it is not just us, that we can fix it, that it does take all versions of libertarian to really move the needle, then I think there's a bright future for the party ahead of us.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't say it better. Joseph Briggs, $50 super chat. Thank you very much for that. Sorry I missed this live. Looking forward to watching the video. Great that you did this. Yeah, listen, we need more of this. I wish I'd been doing more of this all along, but all we can do, at some point, I think there's a sunk cost fallacy, right? And I think sometimes, there's probably some people that just feel like they're so dug in on doing things a certain way and they have to keep doing it. But I don't know. I just feel like at some point, you need to eat the humble pie, and then you need to just be like, we don't have to keep doing this, right? And I desperately want the Mises Caucus to actually come to the table and be a positive force for the movement, because there is good work they do. I think the decentralized revolution idea and the emphasis on the 10th Amendment strategy to run candidates at the local level and do nullification to concentrate on sheriff and mayor and city council, there's stuff there that was part of the original strategy that I do think is like that should always be part of the conversation going forward of like a comprehensive, complete libertarian party strategy and libertarian movement strategy. You know, so it's like we I think we need that. We need the best version of Ron Paul libertarians, and we need the best version of all the other libertarians to come to the table and figure this stuff out. We live under like the most totalitarian government in human history, and yeah, I mean, Phil, you've been great with me, you know, both in public and behind the scenes, and that's really refreshing. And it's like for any differences we have, you're not my enemy. You know, the state is our enemy, and I'm tired of. I will say, like, even for there's people out there who I still consider friends, but we're gonna butt heads if they continue to say that I need to make people like you my enemy more than Donald Trump. That's gonna be a problem for me. I'm not gonna operate in that fashion. So, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you all in the chat. It's a very lively chat. Appreciate all of you guys. Again, I'll be back here again Monday with Dave DeCamp. Make sure you don't miss that show. Talk about what's going on in Iran. And yeah, as always, conclude by saying, live at peace. Take care, guys.